Imagine sitting in a crowded hall, every eye on you, knowing what you're about to say could change how the world sees your people forever. Then, in a simple but shattering sentence, he said something that left millions around the world in tears and Africa holding its breath. What happens when one of the world's most respected voices questions your leadership and millions are watching? Ibrahim Traoré had a choice: defend himself like any politician would, or do something that would leave the entire world speechless. What he said next didn't just silence his critics, it moved Michelle Obama herself to tears and changed how Africa sees itself forever. But to understand why his response shook the world, we need to go back to where it all started, and what you're about to witness will challenge everything you think you know about leadership, power, and the courage to stand for truth. Picture this: a sun-drenched afternoon in Los Angeles. Inside a packed auditorium, the air buzzes with anticipation. The Global Leadership Summit has drawn power brokers, world leaders, and changemakers from every corner of the earth. But all eyes are on one woman stepping up to the podium: Michelle Obama, former First Lady, global icon. Her very presence commands respect. For 40 minutes, she captivates the room. Climate justice, educational reform, the future of democracy in developing nations. Her words paint visions of a better world. The audience hangs on every syllable, nodding, applauding, inspired. But then she turns a page and everything changes. Burkina Faso, she says, her voice steady but pointed. The room shifts. Suddenly we're not talking about abstract ideals anymore. We're talking about a real place with real people and a real leader. Under Ibrahim Traoré's leadership, she continues, adjusting her glasses with the precision of someone choosing her words carefully. We've seen impressive strides. Yes, but we must also voice our concerns. The auditorium falls silent. You could hear a pin drop. While the world applauds progress, we must question: are these changes truly empowering the people, or are they simply consolidating power? Her words hang in the air like a challenge. Some audience members applaud, others furrow their brows, but everyone understands the weight of what just happened. One of the world's most respected voices just publicly questioned the legitimacy of a sitting African leader. Within minutes, the internet explodes. Twitter hashtags trend. Worldwide news outlets scramble for responses. Television panels debate the implications. CNN breaking news alerts flash across screens. Al Jazeera calls it a diplomatic earthquake. BBC World Service interrupts regular programming. The phrase Michelle Obama, Burkina Faso becomes the most searched term. Globally, the world watches and waits, but thousands of miles away, in a modest office in Burkina Faso, one man was about to change the entire conversation forever. The broadcast reaches Ouagadougou at sunset, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. In his modest office, no marble corridors, no golden fixtures, just simple furniture, and the flag of Burkina Faso. President Ibrahim Traoré sits alone, watching his aides hover nearby, phones buzzing with urgent calls from diplomats, journalists, advisors. But Traoré raises a hand. Silence. The room becomes a sanctuary of stillness. For the next 40 minutes, he watches every word, every pause, every gesture. His face reveals nothing: no anger, no frustration, no political calculation, just deep contemplative listening. When Michelle Obama's image fades from the screen, the room remains still. His advisors exchange glances. They've seen leaders explode over far less. They've witnessed the predictable playbook: defensive press releases, diplomatic protests, Twitter storms, angry cabinet meetings, emergency sessions with spin doctors. But Traoré simply sits, processing the weight of history, the responsibility of representation, the delicate balance between respect and truth. Finally, he speaks, his voice calm as morning water. Prepare a response, but not to defend, to clarify, to show the world our truth. One advisor steps forward nervously: Mr. President, perhaps we should coordinate with the diplomatic corps, craft a measured statement, consult with our allies. No. Traoré's interruption is gentle but firm: no scripts, no polish, no political theater, no focus groups, no speech writers, no diplomatic doublespeak, just truth. He walks to the window, looking out at his country streets, where children play football with makeshift balls, markets where families earn their daily bread, construction sites where schools rise from red earth like dreams taking physical form. She sees from where she stands, he says quietly, watching a group of children walking home from school. But we see from where we live, and where we live tells a different story. What happened next wasn't just a political response. It was something the world had never seen before. 24 hours later, cameras roll in the same modest office. No grand stage, no teleprompter, no army of speechwriters, no flag-draped podium, no political theater, just Ibrahim Traoré, a simple wooden lectern, and the weight of history pressing down like the African sun. He looks directly into the camera, and somehow through that lens, he's looking at each of us. Mrs. Michelle Obama. He begins, his voice carrying the quiet strength of someone who has nothing to hide. Your concern is noted, and it is welcomed. Criticism from someone of your stature demands serious reflection, but let me make something very clear. And here his voice takes on a different tone, not defensive, not angry, but absolutely certain. Our movement is not about grasping power, it is about reclaiming dignity. Then he does something unprecedented in modern political discourse. He reaches beside the podium and lifts a worn photograph creased from handling the Camera zooms in a family of 5 standing in front of a modest home solar panels glinting on the roof like hope made visible like technology serving humanity instead of enslaving it. This family, Traoré continues, his voice growing warmer, lived in darkness for generations. Their children did homework by candlelight when they could afford candles by moonlight. When they couldn't tonight, their children study under electric light powered by the sun that shines on all of us equally. This isn't about power, Mrs. Obama. This is about justice. This is about the fundamental human right to light, to education, to possibility. The photograph trembles slightly in his hands, not from nervousness, but from the emotional weight of what it represents. Every pixel tells a story of transformation. Every shadow speaks of hope, emerging from despair. Yes, we face challenges. He continues, his voice gaining strength. Corruption, instability, violence, the legacy of decades of mismanagement. But these didn't begin yesterday. These are not the failures of African leadership. These are the scars of colonial legacy, decades of being told what's best for us by people who've never walked our soil, never felt our struggles, never understood our dreams, never seen their children go to bed hungry, never watched their parents die from preventable diseases, never experienced the humiliation of begging for aid that comes with conditions that benefit the giver more than the receiver. He sets the photograph down gently, like placing a cornerstone for a cathedral of hope. What we're doing isn't perfect. We make mistakes, we stumble, we learn, we adjust, but we're not claiming to be saviors. We're not presenting ourselves as the finished product. We're simply saying, give us the space to heal, to restructure, to reclaim our right, to define our own future, to make our own mistakes and learn from them without constant supervision from those who never lived our reality. His eyes find the camera again, and there's something in them, not defiance, not anger, but quiet, unshakable certainty. You see consolidation of power. We see the consolidation of hope. You see authoritarian control. We see autonomous choice. You see a threat to democracy. We see democracy finally serving African interests. The difference, Mrs. Obama, isn't in what we're doing, it's in where we're standing. When we look at it, perspective shapes perception, and perception shapes policy. He takes a breath, and for a moment the mask of leadership slips away. Underneath is just a man who loves his people with a father's fierce protection and a son's deep reverence. We don't need the world's permission to love our children. We don't need approval to want better for our families. We don't need validation to believe that African solutions can solve African problems. We don't need a stamp of approval from former colonial powers to know that our children deserve the same opportunities as children everywhere else. The silence that follows isn't empty, it's pregnant with possibility, full of dignity, full of truth, full of a continent that has been waiting for generations to hear these words spoken with such quiet power. I thank you for your concern, Mrs. Obama. Your voice carries weight and influence, and with that comes responsibility, but I invite you to see us not as we appear in your headlines or your policy briefs or your State Department briefings, but as we are in our homes, in our schools, in our markets, in our dreams. Come to Burkina Faso, sit with our families, eat our food, learn our stories, walk in our shoes, then judge not just our methods but our motives, not just our policies but our people, not just our government but our hopes. He steps back from the podium, and somehow that simple gesture feels like a revolution, feels like Independence Day, feels like freedom itself taking a bow. But what happened next was something no one, not even Traoré himself, could have predicted. Within hours, something extraordinary begins to unfold across an entire continent, like a sunrise that starts in one place but illuminates everything. In a cafe in Lagos, Nigeria, university students gather around a phone, watching Traoré's response for the third time. One young woman wipes tears from her eyes. Finally, she whispers, someone said what we've been thinking for years. Someone spoke our truth to power. Someone didn't apologize for being African. In Nairobi, Kenya, a group of entrepreneurs pause their evening meeting. The room falls silent as Traoré's words fill the space. When it ends, the oldest member, a man who lived through independence, who remembers the promises of freedom, who has watched decade after decade of disappointment, nods slowly. That, he says, is what leadership sounds like. That is what we fought for. That is what our independence was supposed to sound like. Across social media, something unprecedented happens. #African Dignity begins trending, but not with angry posts or political slogans or anti-Western rhetoric, but with stories, personal, intimate human stories. A teacher in Ghana shares a photo of her classroom built with local materials, taught in local languages. This is what progress looks like from where I stand. A farmer in Mali posts a picture of his irrigation system built with his neighbors using techniques passed down through generations. Nobody asked Europe's permission to dig this well. A mother in Rwanda uploads a video of her daughter reading fluently. In Kinyarwanda, she's learning in her own language, in her own country, for her own future, building on our ancestors' wisdom, not abandoning it. But it's not just social media, it's not just hashtags, it's real life. In universities across the continent, students organize viewing parties, not protests, not demonstrations, but celebrations. Celebrations of seeing themselves reflected in leadership that doesn't apologize for existing, doesn't beg for validation, doesn't shrink to fit into others' expectations. Doesn't perform respectability for Western audiences in Johannesburg, South Africa. A retired freedom fighter calls his granddaughter play that speech again. He says, I want to hear what strength sounds like in your generation. I want to remember why we fought. I want to believe our sacrifices weren't in vain. Even in the diaspora, the response is electric. In London, African professionals gather in community centers sharing the video with tears in their eyes. In Toronto, immigrant families translate the speech for their children born in Canada. But hungry for connection to home in Paris, African students project the video onto university walls, turning academic spaces into shrines of pride. The response isn't nationalism, it's recognition of dignity, recognition of the right to self-determination, recognition that African stories can be told by African voices without needing foreign approval or Western validation. A young Senegalese filmmaker captures it perfectly on Twitter. We've been waiting our whole lives to hear someone speak about us like we're human beings with agency, not just victims who need saving or threats that need managing. But perhaps the most powerful response comes from the most unexpected place, in the remote village where that family with the solar panels lives. The family from Traoré's photograph. The children have no idea they've become symbols of anything. They're just doing homework under electric light, the way children should everywhere, the way children in New York and London and Paris take for granted. Their father, watching the speech on his phone, calls his wife over. Together they listen to their president hold up their photo to the world, not as evidence of his success, but as proof of their dignity, as testimony to their humanity. He told the truth, the mother says simply. We were in darkness, now we have light. That's all, that's enough, that's everything. Sometimes the most profound revolutions happen not with slogans or protests, but with simple truths spoken clearly enough for the whole world to hear. But perhaps the most important response was yet to come from the woman who started it all. 3 weeks later, Michelle Obama sits for an interview with CNN's Anderson Cooper. The usual polish is there, the careful words, the diplomatic tone, the practiced gestures. But something is different, something fundamental has shifted. I've been thinking a lot about President Traoré's response. She begins, her voice carrying a weight that wasn't there before, a humility that speaks to genuine reflection, and I have to admit I underestimated the context. Cooper leans forward. This isn't the response anyone expected. This isn't political calculation or damage control. This is something rarer, authentic growth. When I spoke about Burkina Faso, I was looking at data points, policy frameworks, democratic indicators, governance metrics, all the tools we use to measure success from the outside. She pauses, choosing her words with the same care she once used as First Lady, but with a new awareness of their impact. But President Traoré showed me something I hadn't considered, the view from the inside, the lived experience of the people. We're discussing the human reality behind the policy abstractions. Her admission is striking, not because it shows weakness, but because it demonstrates strength, real strength, the kind that admits error and grows from it. It takes courage to say you were wrong when the whole world is watching, when your reputation is built on being right. His response wasn't defensive, it was educational. He didn't attack my credibility, he expanded my perspective. That photograph of the family with solar panels, that wasn't a political prop, that was a human reality I hadn't fully considered. Behind every policy is a person, behind every statistic is a story, and I lost sight of that. She looks directly into the camera, and for a moment she's not the former First Lady or the political figure or the global icon. She's just someone who learned something new, someone who grew. We talk a lot about listening and leadership, but how often do we actually do it? How often do we really hear not just the words, but the experience behind them? President Traoré taught me that dignity looks different depending on where you stand, and maybe, just maybe, we need to stand in different places before we judge from our own. The interview becomes one of the most watched political conversations of the year, not because of conflict or controversy, but because of something rarer: growth, public growth, humble growth, the kind of growth that makes leadership worth following. But if you think this story ends with politics and diplomacy, you're about to discover its real heart. 2 months after the world watched their exchange, Ibrahim Traoré does something that no cameras capture, no headlines announce, no diplomatic cables report, no Twitter threads analyze. He visits a school, not for a photo opportunity, not for a political event, not because his handlers told him it would look good, just because schools are being built and children are learning. And sometimes a president needs to remember why he does what he does. The École Primaire de l'Espoir, the primary school of hope, sits on red earth under an endless blue sky, concrete walls, painted bright yellow, metal roof that gleams in the sun, wooden desks arranged in neat rows, nothing fancy, everything necessary, everything filled with possibility. When Traoré arrives, the children don't line up in formal rows or recite prepared speeches. They don't perform for the president, they just keep being children, laughing, playing, learning, their voices mixing with the afternoon breeze. Their teacher, a young woman named Aminata, who studied in the capital but chose to return home, greets him simply, Mr. President, welcome to our classroom. No ceremony, no fuss, just invitation. He sits in one of the small wooden chairs, his knees almost touching his chin, listening as 8-year-olds practice reading in French, and more, their voices mixing like music, like hope taking shape in sound on the chalkboard. Someone has written L'Espoir hope in careful chalk letters after the lesson. As children file out for recess, one little girl hangs back. In her small hands she clutches a crumpled piece of paper, a drawing made with colored pencils, a house with a pointed roof, a smiling sun, a stick figure holding a book, all rendered with the careful imprecision of childhood dreams. She approaches shyly, as children do when they have something important to say, something that feels bigger than words. Monsieur le President, she whispers, this is my dream house. It has electricity like school does now, and books, lots and lots of books, enough to fill every room. She hands him the drawing, her eyes bright with possibility, bright with the kind of hope that only children carry. I can dream now, she says so softly. He has to lean in to hear. Before, I couldn't read at night, now I can. Now I dream about tomorrow. Ibrahim Traoré takes the drawing with the same reverence others reserve for state documents, for treaties, for constitutions. He kneels down to her level, no longer a president, no longer a leader. Just a man talking to a child, just humanity meeting. Humanity good, he says, his voice thick with emotion. Never stop dreaming, never let anyone tell you your dreams are too big. In that moment, every diplomatic exchange, every political debate, every international criticism fades away. Here is the answer to every question about leadership: a child who can dream because she can see, because she has light, because someone believed her future mattered. The drawing still hangs in his office today, next to the photograph of the family with solar panels, 2 images. One truth: sometimes the most important revolutions happen not in presidential palaces but in small hands holding big dreams, and that's where our story really begins. 6 months have passed since that afternoon in Los Angeles. The news cycle has moved on, the hashtags have faded, the diplomatic world has found new controversies to debate, new crises to analyze, new leaders to scrutinize. But in Burkina Faso, solar panels still gleam on rooftops, children still study under electric light, schools still rise from red earth, and somewhere a little girl still dreams of her house full of books. This story isn't really about Ibrahim Traoré or Michelle Obama. It's not about politics or diplomacy or international relations. It's about something much simpler and much more powerful: the right to define your own narrative, the right to tell your own story, the right to be seen as you are, not as others imagine you to be. For too long, African stories have been told by everyone except Africans. African problems have been analyzed by people who've never lived them. African solutions have been dismissed by minds that never imagined them. African dreams have been interpreted by those who never shared them. But in that moment, when a young president looked into a camera and said, this is who we are, and this is what we're building, something shifted, not just in Burkina Faso but across a continent that has been waiting for permission to tell its own story. Michelle Obama's grace in listening and learning reminds us that true leadership isn't about being right, it's about being open to being wrong and growing from it. It's about the courage to admit when perspective was limited. Ibrahim Traoré's response reminds us that dignity isn't something you demand, it's something you embody. It's not something you argue for, it's something you live. And that little girl's drawing reminds us why any of this matters in the first place, why politics exists, why leadership matters, why we build anything at all. Leadership isn't about the size of your office or the reach of your influence. It's not about how the world sees you or what history will say about you. It's not about the monuments they build or the streets they name after you. Leadership is about the light in a child's eyes when she realizes she can dream. It's about the solar panel that turns darkness into possibility. It's about the courage to say, this is who we are, and mean it even when the whole world is watching, even when the stakes couldn't be higher. The world is full of people waiting for permission to lead, to dream, to define themselves, to tell their stories, to matter. But perhaps the most revolutionary act isn't asking for permission at all. Perhaps it's simply saying, we were in darkness, now we have light. That's all, and sometimes that's everything.